So for some reason my community post took off like a storm in the Reddit communities of Phainon mains and Cerydra mains. And unfortunately it's probably because my Reddit, I never use it. I tried to put a comment clarifying my full thoughts, however it didn't receive any likes, and instead all the doom posting received likes. Not that I disagree, Cerydra is pretty ass in my eyes, right? So what happened? Well, I made a community post pretty much just saying once you get Phainon to E2, Cerydra becomes a worse overall, increase in his performance compared to E0, and this only increases the further you go into his own vertical investment. And I see a lot of people aren't happy about this. Where's the calcs, right? Even though I didn't give any specific increase or decrease and made a general statement. People are getting mad at me for not making calcs when saying something like this. However, the reason I didn't make calcs is because you don't need calcs. You can literally just write down the rotation of Cerydra, Rania, and Sunday for Phainon. Just write it down on a piece of paper or something. You can keep track of the stacks where he can't, use counter and he's always using basic. It just is what it is. Like, you can instantly tell why she loses value. But I guess I have to make a video explaining it, right? So here's a picture on the screen of the rotation I used. It was with Phainon entering ult, with Cerydra having obviously 8 stacks. The second he uses a meteor, he's down to 2 Cerydra stacks and 3 Scourge, which, by the way, I think I realized is wrong. Phainon starts with 6 stacks but has a cap of 7, so he would actually start with 2 Scourge. It would be less than I originally thought, right? So that is the rotation right there for those wondering. E2 Phainon gets 2 additional meteors from Cerydra, with a total of 4 of them being buffed, right? Now for E0 Phainon, it's literally the exact same. E0 Phainon can also guarantee an additional 2 meteors, with 4 of them being buffed. But the difference is that E2 Phainon gets extra turns for each meteor he uses, meaning his basic and counter damage is now much more notable towards the overall damage output compared to E0 Phainon. And so this means that Cerydra loses a bit of value for Phainon if she can't provide another additional meteor for E2, right? And this only becomes worse the further you go into Phainon's vertical investment, because Phainon's E4 adds 4 stacks to the counter. So this means in 2 or higher, amount of mobs on field, which is incredibly common, E4 Phainon will pretty much always get 6 stack counters against enemies, further increasing his counter's damage to the total damage output. And these counters are being half-assedly buffed. This is the problem with Cerydra. She is not buffing all of his attacks equally. Only 4 meteors out of like another 7 attacks that Phainon does at E2 are buffed. The other 7 aren't fully buffed. And so a overall damage amper like an E1 Robin, a Tribby, whatever, they're still worse than Cerydra, right? Please don't get it twisted. They are still worse than Cerydra, but because their amps work for literally every single attack, the difference between Cerydra and these overall ampers starts inching closer, right? It's not as vast of a gap as it is at E0 when you're going E2 or higher, right? And in pure fiction especially, his counter is a massive part of his damage output. In E2, you do a counter 7 times. You do 7 meteors. Every extra turn you use a counter, and then there's a finisher. His counter only becomes better and better in the modes he is weakest in, making the gap closer and closer, right? So this is the problem Cerydra has, where if you go further into Phainon's vertical investment, E2 and farther, she just becomes worse and worse of an overall upgrade for his performance, right? At E0, allowing 2 extra meteors when he already only gets 3 is massive, and it buffing 4 of the 5 meteors is an insane damage jump. But E2 onwards, this only becomes less and less sorry, my voice is dead. Less and less important, right? Once again, let me clarify this before people get really mad at me, right? She is still best in slot. She is still best in slot. It's just slightly less best in slot the further you go into his vertical investment. And this is why I made my video titled Dan Heng could be competitive with Cerydra for Phainon. Phainon doesn't get any other sources of vulnerability in his normal team. And so if Dan Heng has a light cone similar to Hyacines or similar to Ling Sha's, if his light cone has 18% vulnerability, that is a straight up 18% overall damage increase. And you're getting this on Dan Heng, who is a general preservation sustain that you'll be able to run with multiple characters, anyone alongside Sunday for that damage boost increase, unlike Cerydra, who is literally only for Phainon. I've been constantly seeing a point brought up by people of, oh, well, why does this matter if it's E2 or higher Phainon? I only care about E0 Phainon with Cerydra. Why would you ever get Cerydra outside of only wanting it for Phainon? She isn't best in slot for literally anyone else. Well, she is for Anoxa, but the gap between like Tribby and Robin to Cerydra for Anoxa is much smaller than the gap between Tribby and Robin and Cerydra for Phainon. Right? So I don't understand this line of thinking, because you're basically already only pulling Cerydra for one character, and if you just put in one more cost, your Phainon can have a 100% overall performance increase versus only going one cost into Cerydra and getting like a 20% performance increase, right? And in the first place, pulling Cerydra is already similar in value to his E1, because his E1 is a 50% crit damage buff, and as well it saves him some AV the more mobs he kills. So in pure fiction, he is way better at E1 than pulling Cerydra for him, for example, right? So that's all I want to say. That's all I want to get across. I've said my statement. I've made my peace. I heard Yelov made a community post agreeing with my point. I appreciate it. I am getting some heat as of current. However, do keep in mind, once again, the last time I will clarify this, she is still best in slot, just less best in slot as of current V3, the further you go into Phainon's vertical. Love you all. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great night. Peace out.